Well, it's kind of like Christmas here on the 80s at 8 today because anytime that we can have a artist that we play, it is Christmas in April. Today we are joined by Paul Robb, a founding member of Minnesota-based band Information Society. So excited to have you on, Rob. Or
It's a
Paul,
pleasure.
sorry. You got the two first name thing going on. Sorry.
Yeah,
Thanks so much for joining us, Paul.
happens all the time. A pleasure to be here.
So first off, we do get into Minnesota a little bit. Like I said, Information Society is Minnesota based. Are you originally from Minnesota?
Yeah, all three of the founding members of the band are originally from the great metropolis of New Brighton, Minnesota, which is a suburb of Minneapolis, northern suburb of Minneapolis.
Excellent. And did you meet at a young age, or how did you guys kind of all come to meet?
Well, we knew each other in high school. We knew of each other. We weren't The three of us weren't really friends, but we were sort of the three poles of the nerd continuum in high school, and we were the three most picked on kids in high school. So we knew of each other, but we didn't really become friends and form the band until a couple of years later.
I say a founding member, but at the end of the day, what I've read, it kind of seems like you were the one that kind of wanted to start the band. Would you say that is that correct?
Yeah, I was the motivating force. I recruited Kurt, and later on James Cassidy. So I guess that would make me the founder. But it's been so long now. We all count as founders.
Totally, totally. And how did the kind of music that everyone knows you for and what you do today, how did that kind of come about? Was that the style of band that you were from the start, or did that just kind of come with time?
Well, I think like as with a lot of artists, we began by imitating the artists that we liked, and so we did a couple of talent shows in high school and other things of that nature, and working in the studio gradually as we acquired equipment. It just became clear that there wasn't much of the kind of music that we were listening to that was being produced locally, and we set out to do that, and that's what we did.
What was the Minnesota Twin Cities music scene like when you started?
Well, I've been asked that question a lot because Minneapolis was at the time very famous for its music scene, and rightly so. But we definitely were the black sheep. I mean, I would say that we were the black sheep, but we weren't even noticed enough to be known as black sheep. But there were two poles in the scene at that time, and by which I mean the mid '80s, early to mid '80s, and you had the Prince R&B sort of scene that included the Prince and the Time, and a number of groups that are not quite as well known now, like Alexander O'Neill and Sue Ann Carwell and Enterprise and all these other bands, Maserati, a bunch of Prince affiliated and Prince-esque groups. And then on the other side, you had a very, very lively punk scene that was, led by groups like Husker Du and The Replacements, and a band called Loud Fast Rules that went on to become known as later changed the name to Soul Asylum. And there was this, as with a lot of towns at that point, there was sort of a swirling scene of interchanging groups and musicians. We played a lot of bills with the musicians that would go on to form groups like Semisonic and things like that. And then there were outliers. There was there was a group called Limited Warranty that their big claim to fame was that they won the Star Search contest, which as I recall, was like a network television show where bands would compete against each other or something with Ed McMahon.
Yep, that's correct. That's correct.
And they didn't, they won that contest, but they didn't really amount to anything. And then other outliers like the Jets was a huge group. The Jets probably had more hits than any other group from Minneapolis other than Prince. But
It's really interesting.
Yeah, no, nobody really remembers them anymore.
But Paul, do you know what's really interesting about that, Paul?
What?
is that about 3 months ago we had Leroy Wolfgram on the program
Mm-hmm.
and talked to him of the Jets, and
Uh-huh.
it was really interesting to get his perspective. And then in about 2 weeks we have St. Paul Peterson coming on.
Oh yeah, I've got a good story about St. Paul. I want to say maybe 5 years ago, a friend of mine who's a really kind of crazy, nutty, Dadaistic composer and Svengali in the Minneapolis scene decided to do a musical performance on a boat in the middle of a river during an art festival, and I took part in that. And we were doing a cover of Crazy by Gnarls Barkley
Oh, wow.
as part of it was like an hour-long rock opera for, it was one of those things. And I got to hear Paul Peterson play bass up close, and my God, that man is a monster on the bass. That really made me realize like what a good bass player sounds like. And he was great. We had a great time.
And so now you're getting started, and then what I've kind of heard is Running is kind of the song that changed it all. How did that kind of period come up from being a kind of a smaller based band and then all of a sudden kind of exploding a little bit?
Yeah, well, we played shows locally for about a year or two, I'd say 2 years. We had one self-produced, recorded EP that we put out, and we didn't really know anything about the music business and how it worked. And pre-internet, it was this kind of information was really hard to come by. And I just kept thinking like, well, we're playing shows. Why haven't we been discovered yet? It's sort of like a Hollywood, like a malt shop story, like Betty Grable or something. And then in I guess it was the summer of '84, the band kind of exploded, and Jim Cassidy went off to Seattle. He literally took a train in the middle of the night and decided he was going to start a new life. And at the same time, our singer, Kurt Larson, decided to sell all his equipment and take his student loan money and went to Vienna, Austria for some reason. And so I was sort of left alone. But I kept the name of the band going, and I started working with a new singer, and he brought a song to me and said, what about this one? And that was the song Running. And I really liked it, but I wasn't quite ready for prime time. And I spent a couple of months working on it. And on the basis of that song, I was able to get a deal with a local record company. So that song first appeared on an EP that we put out in 1984. And then we re-recorded it because the original version was actually quite terrible. And you can find it on YouTube. Some horrible people have posted it on YouTube. We re-recorded it, and an enterprising DJ in the Bronx, New York, named Little Louis Vega started playing it. He was 17 years old at the time, and it became a huge hit in New York. And as soon as we had a big hit and some viable, remunerative performances to do, suddenly all the rats came back to the ship that they thought had been sinking but wasn't sinking. And Kurt came back from Vienna, and Jim Cassidy came back from Seattle, and we all lived together in a house. And we started performing in New York, and that was the genesis of the modern sound of Information Society. Prior to that, we had been doing very abstruse art rock, art synth rock that included things like, Dadaistic dialogues and clanging on junkyard parts and things like that. And after Running, we realized that we could become a pop group if we wanted to. And so that's what we set out to do.
Perfect. Let's listen to Running here on the 80s at 8. We'll be right back. That was Running by Information Society. And again, we're with Paul Robb here. I'm Harry Lipsiea, and we're with Paul Robb, who is a founding member of the band. Also, after this song, kind of became the main songwriter. Would you say, Paul? Most of the songs you
Uh,
have writing credits on.
yeah, that's true. I mean, I'd say I probably wrote about 70% of the band's songs, and then Kurt and I together wrote the remaining songs.
Perfect. So, like you said, Running's a big hit in New York. And then what's that next step between albums here? What kind of went into making that next album?
Yeah, it was a very interesting period and so full of landmines. Like this is where a lot of bands, end up, dead on the side of the road, and we could easily have been, roadkill like that too. And it's not anything to do with how smart we were or how good we were at our decision making. I'm the first one to admit it was mostly just luck that got us through this next period. So we were because Running became a hit in New York and it became a hit in Florida, South Florida. It was basically a hit in the Latin markets.
Okay.
And so that meant the Latin parts of New York and New Jersey and Connecticut, and then the Latin parts of Florida, South Florida. And so we spent the winter and the summer of 1985 and most of 1986 playing track shows in those places, which was a brand new concept to us. We had been used to playing hour-long or 90-minute long sets of live electronic music, and what these audiences wanted to see was 3 songs where all the music was on tape except for the vocals. And it was we didn't really like that, and so we insisted on plugging in instruments, which caused all sorts of mayhem for these venues. They were mostly clubs and bars, and they didn't really have systems that were designed to they didn't have house sound engineers or anything like that. So it was always trouble. We always made trouble wherever we went. But it was very popular, and because it was so big, the label who had initially licensed Running which was Tommy Boy, they gave us an album deal. And so in 1980, late 86, early 87, we went into the studio in Minneapolis with the same team that we had used to record Running, and we tried to make a record, an album, a full album. And it was just awful. We didn't really know how to write songs, actual pop songs. And so it was just like a lot of extended electronic grooves and a lot of things that were clear homages to the music we were listening to at the time. And finally the label people, one from Tommy Boy and one from Warner Brothers, who had taken over Tommy Boy at that time, they flew into Minneapolis to meet us, and they basically said, this music is awful and we don't want to put it out, but we see enough promise in you that we'll up your budget by a lot, and we will help you find a producer who can help you make an actual pop music record. So that's what they did, and they introduced us to a man named Fred Maher, who was exactly our age and had been a member of Scritti Politti, was a member of Scritti Politti at that point, and had just come off working on Electric Cafe with Kraftwerk.
Wow.
And that's kind of all we needed to hear. And it was like, yeah, we want to work with this guy. And so I flew out to New York on my own for pre-production, and I spent the summer of 87 working with him and hashing out these songs. And then Kurt and James flew out that fall to finish up the record and do vocals and do the mixing. And so that's what resulted in our first record. By that time, I had spent enough hours in the studio just listening to pop music and trying to analyze it that I kind of taught myself how to write pop songs. I can remember sitting I had many jobs that were terrible, and one of them was as a parking lot attendant. And I sat in this little tin booth in the middle of a parking lot, and I was listening to some AM pop radio station. And Duran Duran was really big at that point, like Hungry Like the Wolf or whatever.
Yep.
I really admired their vocal harmonies. And, I made notes like, well, we need to do harmonies like that. And so when the time came, I kind of, pulled upon that knowledge that I had gleaned just listening carefully to the music that I liked. And that was what went into the first full-length album.
Excellent. We're with Paul Robb, member of Information Society. And right now we're talking about their self-titled album, Information Society. And let's talk about What's on Your Mind, Pure Energy, your first single, correct, from that album?
Yeah, that's right. Yep. Although Running was on that album too, but it had already come out as a single.
Okay, excellent. Question, at that point, was that something, sampling a phrase or something from something else, was that popular on mainstream radio?
No, not at all. It was brand new. As a matter of fact, in about, I want to say 1986, I called a music store in Minneapolis and I said, "Do you have any samplers I could look at?" And he paused for a moment, and then he said, "Well, we're not giving anything away for free, if that's what you mean." So we first encountered an emulator. That was the first sampler I ever became familiar with, and that just happened to be owned by the studio. And we were doing cut rate sessions at night. And, we fired up the emulator, and a lot of those samples are what you hear on the end of Running. And it was, at that point, it was absolutely brand new. By the time we did What's on Your Mind, there had been a couple of other songs, big songs that used sampling, including, like Art of Noise was doing it. And there was a song called 19 by, I want to say, Paul Hardcastle.
Yep.
Another British guy that used, samples of newscasters and things like that. But we were, it was a brand new technology, and it really excited us. We had a lot of fun playing around with samplers at that point.
And what was it difficult to get Leonard Nimoy's voice, to get that signed off? How did that kind of work?
Oh God, it was a nightmare. I mean, we used all those samples at a time when no one gave any sort of thought to clearances and rights, rights holders. As you may know, just about a month ago, De La Soul finally was able to get their music back on streaming services because they had so many uncleared samples. So this, that was a 30-year wait for them. So compared to that, I guess our troubles weren't that extreme, but it did delay the release of our first album by almost a year.
Wow.
Because we finished it in 87, and then no one said anything. No one gave a peep. We didn't have any idea what we were doing. And so at some point towards the end of the process, someone at Warner Brothers said, "Well, what are all these voices? Who are they? And where did they come from?" And it, suddenly the corporate behemoth that was Warner Brothers realized that they were about to get in trouble with another corporate behemoth, which was Paramount. And they just, brought the whole process to a halt until the samples were cleared, which wasn't even a process. No one even knew how to do that back in those days. These days, it's a very streamlined thing. But at that point, it's like no one even knew what sampling was. And so we were in danger of having the album just put on the shelf and never released. And this is a very famous story, but I'll tell it again. Our A&R man happened to just by chance meet up with someone at a party, and told him about the misery and woes of the band that he had signed, who couldn't get their album out because they had sampled Star Trek voices. And the guy he was talking to was named Adam Nimoy, and he was the son of Leonard Nimoy. And he said, "Oh, that's a terrible story. Let me see what I can do. I'll talk to my dad and see what he has to say." And he talked to Lenny, and Lenny says, "Oh, those poor dumb kids. If Paramount won't give them permission, just let them know. I'll come in and I will recreate the lines for them."
Wow!
Just as a favor, and that's all it took. The whole logjam cleared up. And after he, signaled his willingness to do that, all our problems went away. I mean, we had to pay. That's one of the reasons we didn't make that much money from that album, because, we paid through the nose. We even had to pay union musicians for the background music behind some of the vocal samples that we used. but it was all worth it because it's a great song, and we wouldn't have been able to make that first album without those samples.
Absolutely. Last question before we listen to the song. It seems like the lyrics have maybe taken on even a new meaning with the addition of more technology, social media. Just the fact that it seems it talks a lot about being distant and wondering what someone is thinking. Do you feel like the lyrics have maybe taken on a different meaning because of those things?
Yeah, I can totally see that. I mean, the band in its heyday was, and even today really, was all about exploring the human, ramifications of technology. From our earliest days when the biggest enemy seemed like it was television, which seems so quaint these days to think of network television as being the evil thing. But yeah, I can totally see how it would apply, to the social media universe. Absolutely.
Sounds great. Well, let's listen to it. The first official single off of your album. Here it is. What's on Your Mind? Pure Energy by Information Society. We'll be back right after this. That was What's on Your Mind? Pure Energy by Information Society. And we're joined by Paul Robb of Information Society. A quick story. I'm a huge 80s fan. I was born in the 80s, but I'm a true child of the 90s. Just by the example of the next story, my grandma bought a system called Sega CD. And I will never forget, with the Sega CD came I don't know if you'd call it a sampler or something. There was about 16 songs on it, and 2 of them were yours. Do you remember this at all?
Did you say your grandma?
Yeah, so we had asked...
Harry, are you trying to make me feel old? What's...
No, so my nephew, my cousin, had asked for a Sega, and my grandma, the Sega that was on sale at that time was Sega CD. She didn't know the difference.
Okay.
And so we were one of the thousands of people that bought a Sega CD. And it was funny because it came with 2 CDs. One was Crisscross, the 2 teenagers that wore weird clothes, and then a CD that I think tried to show that the system could also play CDs. And it had both. So it had What's on Your Mind as well as Walking Away. And I actually became more familiar with Walking Away because I think maybe it just got stuck, but I played that song all the time. So it was so cool that I was introduced through a system that really wasn't successful at all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of our career in a nutshell, isn't it? But that came about when we were recording, after we were done recording our first album. We got a call from Warner Brothers, and they had this exciting new technology that they were doing, which, by the way, is the same technology that is still in use today for karaoke. That's what it was developed for in Japan, is basically just to show lyrics for karaoke CDs. And I felt very fancy. I flew out to LA and I stayed there for 2 weeks, and we worked on this graphic element that was part of the CD. Which was essentially just a bunch of in-jokes and cartoon panels that were drawn by our manager. But it was something that Warner Brothers was trying to promote as a graphic element that could be included with a standard music CD. Obviously, it never took off, but there are many nerds out there who were able to look at it. And again, it's one of those things you can find on YouTube if you look for it. And it was, ultimately not a successful technology, but it was very fun to take part in it at the time.
As a 8-year-old kid in my grandma's basement, I loved it. So it worked out. It made a fan out of me. I can tell you that.
Well, you were the target demo.
There you go. So the songs, we'll play 2 songs back to back, and we'll play both Walking Away, which was a top 10 hit in the US, as well as Repetition, which was a little bit more of a ballad from you guys.
Sounds great.
And tell me a little bit about Walking Away. What was the songwriting process for that one?
I have to say, and I feel perfectly at peace saying this 30 years later. Walking Away was my attempt to write What's on Your Mind Part 2, because after we recorded the demo for What's on Your Mind, we knew it was good, and we knew it was it could be the lead song from our album. And so I thought to myself, well, I want to write something else just like that. And so, it's not exactly from a lyrical point of view or a thematic point of view, it's not exactly the same, but from an instrumental point of view, it's very similar. And it was, I kind of wrote it self-consciously thinking, well, maybe this can be the follow-up single to What's on Your Mind.
Very cool. And then Repetition, did you guys do many ballads? Was this unique for your band?
Yes, actually. I mean, we've done a few slow, downbeat songs, down-tempo songs in the interim between then and now. But at the time, it was a pretty strange thing for us to do. But we didn't really have a master plan, I must say, in terms of how to write songs or what songs were going to go on the album. And that was one that just happened to come out. And, it didn't do great in the US. I think it was like it charted in the 60s or the 70s on the pop charts. But in some other markets in the world, like all of South America and all of Latin America in general, Mexico on down to Brazil and Argentina, Repetition is our biggest hit by far in those markets.
Interesting you say that, because when I looked on YouTube, it had tons and tons of comments, because I love the song personally, and I was really interested to see all the comments of people that enjoy it as well and talk about how good of a song it is. But not many were in English. There were tons of Spanish comments, and that just talks about the reach of your band.
Yeah, Spanish and Portuguese. Actually, aside from the US, our biggest market is Brazil. We remain very popular down there for, God knows why, but it's kind of our home away from home down there. And we've had a lot of good times down there. And you know why? Because I think that Repetition was on a soap opera, like a telenovela, and that is the way to have hits in Latin America. And I think that's the reason that Repetition was so big down there.
Excellent. Well, we will play those two songs. So it's Walking Away and Repetition, and we'll be right back. Back on the 80s at 8, we are with Paul Robb, a member of Information Society. It's been so fun to talk today. And we're skipping a lot of time, but just because we're the 80s show, so that was kind of the end of the 80s. You did have some hits in the 90s. Think was a top 40 hit in 1990, I believe. After that, you went on a little hiatus. How has it been since you've been back? So was it about 2006 you came back together?
Yeah, we put out our third Warner Brothers album in '92, which was Peace and Love Incorporated, and it was moderately successful. It was we had hits on the dance chart, but nothing went to into the top 40. And it was one of those ironic situations where our lawyer had negotiated such a good deal for us that the record company had only two choices, like pay us a boatload of money or just cut us loose. And so after that, they said, we'd re-sign you if you want to renegotiate the contract. But we were so cocky, we just walked away. And at that point, I had a new baby, and I had all three of us actually had left New York. We spread out all over the country. And it wasn't until 2006, 2007 that we really kind of decided to get back and play shows. The demand for live appearances kind of, for whatever reason, reappeared at that point. And we've been playing pretty consistently since then, and put out several, 3-4 new records. And we've had a great time because it's kind of like a hobby for us now. We can have fun with it. It's not that critical to our livelihood. Or to our identities, like it was when we were, young boys in our 20s. And so it's a lot more fun, actually.
How many shows would you say are you playing a year?
We probably do 10 to 15 shows a year.
Nice.
Like this year, we played a week's worth of shows in Brazil. We played in Mexico City. Last year, we played some things in Colombia. And then looking forward, we're going to play a couple of dates in Canada and a date in Minnesota, which is our hometown, in Minneapolis, and then a date, I think, somewhere in Florida. But, we're really picky about what kind of live dates we take. And everybody complains because we're not coming to their city, Columbus, Ohio, or Austin, Texas, or whatever. But, we're old people now, and we can't get into the van and do every rock venue that we would like to play. We've become more, as Spinal Tap said, our appeal has become more selective.
As a songwriter, are you always still kind of writing songs, or what? Yeah, are you still writing songs?
Well, I had a 20-year-long career doing music for picture, for TV and films and things like that. And so that kind of kept me pretty nimble in terms of writing. And honestly, I have been surprised at the fact that I've still had an interest in writing, pop songs, quote unquote. And we just put out an album last year, which I think was one of our best, actually, called Oddfellows. And who knows? I don't know if it's going to continue, but we've had a great time sort of refining what our sound is and what our material sounds like.
Lastly, how can people get a hold of Oddfellows to check it out?
Well, it's for sale they made vinyl of it and CDs, but honestly, who knows how on earth does a person buy CDs these days? I don't know. Like, where would you go to buy CDs? So I think the best, anyone interested in hearing our more recent stuff would just be best served by Googling it. We have a pretty active Facebook page. Our web page is only rarely updated, so it's not a place for late breaking news. But the Facebook community is pretty active, so that's a good place to get news about what we've been up to and what we're doing in the recent times.
Excellent. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining us. And after, now we are going to play a couple more kind of synth pop songs. And I just thought maybe I'd throw out who we're going to play and see if you had any memories or anything you wanted to say about them. We got Gary Numan, Devo, and Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark. Are those artists that were influences, or anybody that you enjoyed listening to? Anything like that?
Oh, absolutely. All three of those artists were hugely influential on us. Gary Numan was probably the most influential artist for me personally, and for Kurt, of anyone. I mean, tied with Devo, honestly. If you combine the moroseness of Gary Numan and the playfulness of Devo, that's kind of, you're left with Information Society. I first heard Gary Numan when I was a junior in high school, and God knows how he got onto pop radio at that point. But I was driving home from school in my dad's station wagon, and they were playing Our Friends Electric on the radio. And I was so gobsmacked that I had to pull the car over because I wanted to concentrate so much on the song, because I really could not believe what I was hearing. And that same year, he came on tour, for his first tour, the Pleasure Principle tour. And it was just really rocked my world, changed my whole world. And then I saw him, a year later on the Telecon tour, which was also fantastic. Similarly, with Devo, I didn't know Devo until I met Kurt Larson, and he introduced me to their first record. And, we just listened to their first three records just incessantly. I could probably still sing every song and every note on every one of their records for you. We wanted to be them. Kurt Larson, our singer, got expelled from school for a day by coming to school in a Devo yellow, hazmat jumpsuit. Almost caused a riot at the school, actually. And then Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, OMD, was a little later, but, and a slightly different, of that sort of new romantic era. But we really loved them. I remember seeing them on their first U.S. tour in a dingy little bar in Minneapolis. But they played Enola Gay and, some of their early material. And it was the first time I had ever seen anyone play electronic drums. And it was very influential on me. And I think their vocal style was pretty influential on how Kurt sings, actually, as well. Them and Ultravox.
You are just a wealth of knowledge, Paul, and it's so great to talk with you. I could talk all day, but thank you so much for joining us. It's a true honor.
It's been my pleasure, Harry. Nice talking to you.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again. And again, check out their Facebook page. It's Information Society. Have a great day, Paul.
Thanks very much.